This is the Washington Week Webcast Extra.
Hello and welcome. I'm joined around the table by Molly Ball of The Atlantic, Joan Biskupic of Reuters, Ed O'Keefe of The Washington Post, and Alexis Simendinger of Real Clear Politics. A few weeks ago, the president promised his administration would retaliate against North Korea for what he said was evidence they'd hacked into the computers of the Sony Corporation. Today, that shoe dropped, with the Department of Treasury announcing new sanctions against the isolated nation. What would those sanctions accomplish, Alexis?
The administration was clear in saying that these sanctions were in response to the Sony Entertainment picture entertainment hacking, but that the sanctions were levied against entities and individuals who were not responsible directly for the hacking.
What does that mean?
So what that means is that the administration is using these as a tool, even understanding that there are very few holdings in the United States to actually freeze or to sanction, but to set an example and to indicate abroad, to allies abroad, if you're doing business with these three entities, which are the Korean intelligence arm, its arms sales arm, and its munitions and materiel company, as well as 10 individuals who are doing Korean business all around in some of the countries that we look askance at, Iran and Russia, China, that if they're doing any business through the financial system, that voluntarily the administration wants the financial system to crack down on this. And the administration was saying this is the beginning, it's not complete.
Are these the kind of sanctions, it's never complete, are these the kind of sanctions that change behavior?
Well,
they just send a message.
Well, they actually use the term like a shot across the bow, right? It's supposed to send a message that this crossed a line. There was talking about a threshold, that this was coercive and intrusive to a U.S. company, that this is an effort to try to say that this went beyond something that the United States could ignore, and that there would be more going forward. But in the end, in North Korea, there's no real evidence that we can actually, put a tourniquet on anything materially that Kim Jong Un is going to respond to right away. And I would add, one of the questions is, how will North Korea respond to these sanctions? In other words, there's an expectation of retaliation back.
Okay, Joan, I want to talk to you a little bit about two legal issues. Mm-hmm. One is one that we heard about today, which is that kind of interesting. John Hinckley will not be charged with the murder of Jim Brady, the White House press secretary, who died recently after years of suffering from the fallout, the after effects, the ailments from the shooting of President Reagan and himself in 1991.
81.
Yeah. Thank you. So what does it mean that they're not going to charge him?
Well, essentially they gave two important reasons. One is, remember, he had tried to assassinate President Reagan, and 3 others were injured in this, including Jim Brady. And he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And the prosecutor said, look, we already have that. He can't suddenly be found guilty of anything we still have the insanity finding by the jury, so that's one problem. The second problem is, at the time this occurred in March of 1981, the District of Columbia had a law that said that you could not be charged with homicide for the death of someone a year and a day after the actual incident. So we're talking, since 1981 to, I think, Jim Brady died on August 4th of this year.
So it was never really ever a chance at this
point? No, once the autopsy came back and the medical examiner said that his death can be attributed to that injury. It was a bullet to the brain, and it had caused all sorts of problems that ended up resulting in recurrences of pneumonia and just a lot of problems with him. And so the medical examiner said yes, that his death just in August was the result of that bullet injury. So the prosecutors had that, but then they said, practically speaking, and as a matter of policy and as a matter of can we actually get a conviction here, it would be highly unlikely.
I want to ask you about the court.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit during the program about what to expect in this session, but I'm also curious about if there are some sleeper cases, or at least a sleeper case that we should be keeping our eye on as well.
Well, I want to mention one that's going to be heard on January 21st, and it comes from Texas, and it involves the breadth of fair housing law and what it takes to bring an anti-discrimination claim. And what people should know about this case is that twice before in the last 2.5 years, civil rights groups have tried to keep this kind of case awake from the justices. The justices have actually taken up cases that involve the breadth of fair housing law twice before, and civil rights groups intervened to get the case settled so that the Roberts Court, which tends to be much more conservative than its predecessors, wouldn't be deciding it. And the question is, can you bring a claim for discrimination under fair housing law based on statistics and patterns and practices, but not showing actual intentional discrimination? In this case, it involves Texas officials who give tax credits for certain public housing, and the developers ended up building mostly in poor minority neighborhoods. And a community group, challenged this and said, based on this pattern of where the housing's going up, where these tax credits are going, where the developers are using these credits, this is discriminatory, and tried to file under fair housing law. And lower courts have said that that's possible. But this Supreme Court has been one that's wanted to say, look, if you can't show intentional discrimination, that a policy actually is targeting individuals especially, then probably not. So watch that on January 21st.
January 21st.
Yes.
We'll be watching. Okay, Molly, you wrote an interesting piece in The Atlantic this month about Eric Erickson, now, who most people may have not have ever heard of, but you describe him as the most influential conservative voice. And how is that? How do you draw that? Now, I know who he is. I know what he's done and what he's said. But you went down and kind of hung out with him in his house.
Yeah. So Eric Erickson, for those who don't know who he is the editor-in-chief of RedState.com, which is one of the most influential conservative blogs. It has a smaller readership than some of the places like, Newsmax or the Daily Caller. But a lot of people read it who are intensely interested in politics, Hill staffers, political consultants, Tea Party movers and shakers. And so I make the case that he's the most powerful conservative in America, distinguishing the conservative movement from the Republican Party. He's certainly not the most important Republican, but the Republican Party, Chairman Reince Priebus told me, he consults Erickson regularly in order to keep in touch with that grassroots base. So
he was the architect of the government shutdown in many ways.
Exactly. You think of someone like Ted Cruz, who's been the ringleader of a lot of these Tea Party causes in the Congress. Erickson is very close to Ted Cruz, and his radio show and his blog and his voice on Twitter are often egging Ted Cruz on or giving him ideas. Someone like Jim DeMint, the former senator, who's also been a conservative ringleader, who's now at the Heritage Foundation, he's someone that Erickson is very close to. And so he's got all these tendrils in the conservative movement that has made it its mission. And this has been, I think, one of the bigger themes of American politics over the last several years, this conflict between the Tea Party, the grassroots base, and the sort of Republican establishment. And Eric's really been in the middle of all that.
And he had a big voice this week when he came out and said that he thought that Steve Scalise could not possibly have not known that he was speaking to David Duke's organization down in Louisiana.
Yeah, very well timed for my profile.
Yes, I thought so. I read it more closely as a result.
But part of why Eric was interesting to me is he is someone who has a lot of contradictions, right? He's someone who seems to speak for that sort of Bubba base of the GOP, the white man from the South, right? But he mostly grew up in Dubai. He's a lawyer by training. He lives in Macon, Georgia. He prides himself very much on this sort of outside the Beltway perspective. But he also served a term on the city council of Macon, Georgia, where he was this paragon of bipartisan compromise and helped everybody get along in the city. So he's a really interesting figure, I think a lot more complex than a lot of liberals might give him credit for, and someone who I think provides a lot of insight into what that grassroots of the party is thinking.
You should worry if anybody looks like a cookie cutter. They usually aren't, not if they have real impact. Ed O'Keefe, we're counting on you to tell us who these new folks are who are coming to town, joining Congress, and who we should be watching.
Well,
Start with the Senate.
There's 14 new members of the House Republican caucus, 11 new Republican senators this year. Among them, Joni Ernst, who becomes the first woman elected statewide in Iowa, a military veteran, and will be a 2016 power broker like no other, given that the Hawkeye State plays such a central role to what's going on there. Another one to watch, Cory Gardner, former member of the House from Colorado. A lot of people see him as the kind of model spokesman of the new generation of Republican legislators. He won, he orchestrated quite a takeover of that campaign for himself, defeated Mark Udall, and is the kind of Republican that Democrats admit that they really like, sort of mainstream. Another one to watch, Gary Peters. He's the only Democrat who won a Senate seat this year. So he will.
He's the unicorn.
He is the unicorn. He will wallow alone in the minority for quite some time, we'll see, but also a former member of the House. A lot of experience spread across both chambers, whether you were a state legislator or a member of the House who's now in the Senate. If you look at the House, a lot of history happening this time. Elise Stefanik, who comes from the New York North Country, just a little north of where I'm from, 30 years old, becomes the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. Mia Love, the first black Republican woman to serve Congress, she's coming from Utah.
Now today she's joining the Black Congressional Caucus, which I must say that many black Republicans have not done in the past.
Exactly, to her credit. Debbie Dingell, first woman to succeed her husband through an election. A critical distinction because many, of course, have succeeded their late husbands in the past. And another guy to watch, Will Hurd. He's in his 30s, first black Texas Republican. He takes over a huge district that stretches from San Antonio to El Paso. Black, also a former CIA operative, speaks about 3 languages. So
how could all of those things exist in one person?
He's an interesting guy, and he's from one of those swing districts, so he's got to be very careful about how Republican he becomes or how willing he is to perhaps moderate his positions, and where will he live in the Republican caucus.
Just want to round this up by talking a little bit about Mario Cuomo. He was when I said he was larger than life, I wasn't overstating it for a change. He was quite the amazing person, but I was also taken by the things he did not do. All of us who cover politics were marked by the day. We can remember where we were on the day that the plane was idling on the tarmac, and he didn't get on it because he wasn't ready to run for president, and it was getting ready to take off for New Hampshire, and he didn't go. And when you look back on that, you think of the missed opportunities of his ability to run for president, and also a missed opportunity, Joan, to be on the Supreme Court.
In 1993, Bill Clinton had him as his first choice to become the successor to Byron White when Byron White announced his retirement. And his people went to him. George Stephanopoulos said, you know, we're going to offer you this. And he hemmed and hawed. He said yes,
George
no, yes.
worked for him.
Yes, yes. So he was really interested in it. And it was very frustrating to President Clinton because he's like, I'm not going to beg him to do this. And in the end, Mario Cuomo said, no, I don't want the cloistered life of the Supreme Court. And instead, Bill Clinton ended up choosing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is a year older and still around.
You know, you guys, is it possible at all that Mario Cuomo actually left a mark on the party? I mean, he was an unabashed, unrepentant liberal in a party that, as we saw with Bill Clinton's election, was going the other way. Did he go out of style?
I think he went out of style for a while, but I think it's been amazing to watch in the remembrances of Cuomo, how much they resonate right now with a Democratic Party that's in the wilderness, that doesn't feel like it knows how to win anymore, and it's really torn between these competing visions, with a lot of Democrats wanting to go the way of an Elizabeth Warren, of someone who is speaking much more for that muscular kind of liberalism that Mario Cuomo represented, and that ironically his son doesn't represent at all. And, you know, now we have, you know, Hillary Clinton, also the model of the Bill Clinton New Democrat that Mario Cuomo was so set against, looking to be the next standard bearer for the party, and a lot of Democrats really torn still between those two voices in the party and which way they're going to go.
Well, for a man who coined the phrase, you know, that you do politics with poetry and govern in prose, he died poetically on the day that his son was sworn into his second term in office as
32 years
governor
to the
of New
day
York.
that he had been sworn in as governor.
It's remarkable. Right. It's remarkable. But he left a mark in many, many ways. He'll be a person we'll be comparing a lot of people to in the future. Thank you all very much. And thank you all for watching. While you're online, dive into the Washington Week Vault to hear what we had to say in 1992, Gloria Porter, that's who it was, when the number of women in Congress cracked 50 for the first time. And we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.